Okay, started the recording. I'm not going to do video because I'm slightly bandwidth constrained and I don't want to have that conflicting with audio, but this is the May 12th SIG release subproject release engineering meeting. This is a Kubernetes community meeting. As always, we adhere to our code of conduct, and this video recording will be posted to YouTube after the meeting. So welcome everybody. We have a couple of things in the agenda. The biggest one that I was hoping we'd be talking about today depends on Stephen, and since he hasn't joined, maybe we can talk about we can move on to the second thing on the list, the other one. Marky, do you want to talk about status with triage things?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Uh, with Triage Party, they just released the version 1.0, so I've tested that. As you'll recall, when we did the demo 2 weeks ago, it was really good, but there was some problems and some functionality was needed so it could work with the KK repo. That functionality has now been put there. I've tested it against the KK repo. It does a lot better. So with that, I have set up a meeting for this coming Friday. Myself, Marco, Veronica, we are going to get together to start to plan out the task for getting this sort of off the ground and owners, and see how quickly we can get this put into play. So look forward to giving our next meeting, giving an update with the outcome of this Friday's meeting. That is all I have for that.
Anybody have questions on that? I'll say I really appreciate this. Anything we can do to figure out pathways to smoother triage is awesome.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited about this, and I think it's going to change it's going to make things better how we do it. But I think in large part, this is going to be adopted hopefully by the rest of the Kubernetes community, which I think will be pretty awesome.
Yeah, the more any of us can figure out pathways to reducing backlogs and the time to addressing issues, the sooner we spot the issues, figure out how to fix them before lots of extra code has been changed additionally. It's always easier to find an issue when you can be bisecting across a smaller amount of code, whether it's an actual get bisect or just visual bisection, just trying to figure out what the heck happened. If it's what the heck happened this morning, that's a whole lot easier than what the heck happened since 2009. And we have some of those
Exactly.
in our backlog, I think. Well, maybe not quite that far back, but well, I don't know. The bash bug we dealt with in December might have been sort of 2009 vintage.
Yeah, I think this will help us surface a lot of issues quicker. I think it'll help us deal with items a lot uh, faster and in a timely manner. So I'm super excited about this, and I'm also excited that Veronica and Marco will be involved in helping.
Right on. Cool to see this get some legs. So, at that point, we're sort of at the agenda lacking Steven this morning, but Taylor, can I call on you? Anything? I wasn't able personally to attend or was there not a meeting yesterday? The calendar is confusing me.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah, we switched to bi-weekly, so we're gonna have the next meeting on the 18th. We're gonna skip the 25th, and then we're gonna do it on June 1st, just to kind of give everybody a mental break. Everything's still proceeding forward, but just kind of still abiding by that extended schedule. But yeah, no news is good news, at least at least this week. Everybody's still on track, and we're still moving forward on all fronts with the 119 release.
That's the best kind of conflict then, if I had a conflict and thought I missed a meeting and didn't.
Those are always my favorites, paired with the problems that when someone reaches out to you, and by the time you get to respond to them, they say they fixed it. I feel like that goes in the same category.
So have any of you been following along on the image update related things that Stephen's been working on? So he mentioned Stephen Dim's Tim Auclair in the item there in the agenda, but does anybody else have visibility into it?
I don't think anything other than just very high level. I did see distro lists and a couple other callouts there, but yeah, definitely curious, but don't have any more than the high level understanding as to what that looks like.
He and I talked a bit yesterday, and maybe I guess there's information there in the links, but to kind of give a sort of intro level to some of the folks here. I feel like one of the very first interactions I had in SIG release was a bug saying that we had CVEs in our Debian container image. And this is a total ecosystem problem. Containers are built from layered images, and it's quite common to have something that's kind of an operating system base image at the bottom of whatever your application is. There's all sorts of libraries and utilities and standard runtime sorts of things that you might fall back onto that are just Linuxisms. So you start out with a handy base. Maybe it's just a Debian or Ubuntu Slim or full, hard to say, anywhere on that spectrum. And there's a ton of different ones. Also, sometime back, maybe a year and a half ago, I'd done a grep of the source for Docker files and the base tags within them. And I came up with like 40 different ones, everything from Ubuntu and Debian to Fedora and Alpine and other things as well. And then these are tricky because they're sort of nested. If you look at some app that's Golang based, it may be based on the Golang image, and then that image itself is based on another one, and you get these series of things. So if you want to get your image that's based on a couple of other images updated and not have CVEs in it, you may have to go through and build a whole series of other images so that you can effectively do like this rebasing action. In a way, it's a lot like a git rebase, the net effect, except it's a whole bunch of building of container images and then testing them and pushing them to a repository from which something else can consume them, which requires its own PR to change and pull against the new tag. And you have this whole ripple of many actions. And right now, most of that is manual. And for that reason, and then just like security being kind of a constant treadmill on any given day, if you had to create a simple test function for it, is there a new CVE in Linux, you could just return true. Like that's kind of the state of things. We're always finding new things, which means we're always releasing fixes. And across something like an Ubuntu full image, there's probably literally something every day. So anybody who comes along and does a security scan, if we haven't updated recently, is going to find a couple dozen CVEs and say, hey, what are you all doing? And in response to that, typically we said, oh yeah, we ought to update that, and updates happened. But that was a manual and a reactive process. So what we want to get to is first bases that are more tailored to the usage, and that's where distro list comes in. Instead of using a full Linux base, there's not a distro there in the base image, and you're trying to only copy in explicitly the particular things that your application depends on. So that gives you a cleaner base, a smaller attack surface. But we also have other things that do necessarily depend on a little bit bigger system there, and the Debian base has been a commonly used one. So for these cases, we need to work on better triggers and better automation so that these things can automatically flow. And as an example, if you think about how Prow works right now, Prow is under version control, a new version comes out, and it gets its build pipeline exercised, and eventually that pops into the actual test infra system that we're running. So we could potentially do something like that where we have a full automation, auto bumping things. It may be something where we have regular builds and CI happening, but more careful inspection, because Prow, like the test folks understand what they've changed in Prow and they're actively supporting it as kind of one and the same. But the set of us who'd be responsible for these images and promoting them into production usage, we're not subject matter experts on everything that is Debian or everything that is Ubuntu or everything that is Linux across any and all operating system images from any of the distros that might happen to be in use somewhere in our ecosystem. So we do need to be a little more tentative probably and figure out what the test plan is and how we automate builds, but also automate quality assurance and then figure out what the right level of risk mitigation is before we promote things. There might be scenarios where we simply auto promote. There might be others where we want a human to kind of look at. And then we also have some questions around how do we version this? At the level of our image tags, we would like them to have Symver, but Linux as a whole, like the entire universe of open source packages that compromise Linuxes in general, those aren't together under semantic versioning. How do we know when something major has changed that's going to break something? And probably, I'm inclined to think we can't. Like that's where the kind of test plan and figuring out how we pragmatically start to use something, there's going to always be some level of test and prod, but that we don't just automatically push things and months later realize, oh, this weird issue is coming from that push way back then because package foo doesn't strictly control its versioning and we pulled in something that's had a major change and is not compatible with what our prior assumptions were. So this is a pretty interesting space, I think. There's some technically hard problems around build and test and release here that we need to figure out how to improve the automation around. And some interesting work has happened. Steven's done a whole bunch of stuff just lately, along with, I guess, Dims and Tim Alclair have been involved as well. But we're going to need to figure out a way as a broader set of people to make that maintenance automated and sustainable also, so that we're not just sort of garbage in, garbage out. If the upstreams are pushing major releases at us, that we're able to notice incompatibilities and figure out a path. And that may also be reporting bugs upstream or reporting bugs against ourselves where we need to change to be able to function relative to the new base. So this will be a new sort of a new frontier of work, and the CI and triage work also is going to be useful in that. So we're hopefully better able to spot issues quickly. So does that make sense as kind of context to folks?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes sense. Is there anything we can do to help out with this, or I guess does it need more hands, or is that too many chiefs in the kitchen then?
Yeah, so that was my big question to Steven. So there's, for example, the Golang is going to get a bump sometime soon. Steven's kind of outlined a plan with a set of folks. A couple of you are on the call today. I don't know if you would want to talk about how you see that going, but my big question to Steven yesterday was like, so when do you think we would try and exercise this? Because we got to start figuring out like how to get more of it documented, more people involved in exercising it, and spread some of the load. Because initially it's going to be a manual and a lot of weirdness to figure out like what the heck just happened. And each of these images right now is kind of its own special snowflake that's going to need some attention to make sure it doesn't just kind of melt down. So I would say like we have too few cubes in the kitchen, but we need to get a little bit more documentation down and a little more practice so that we can sustain getting more cubes in the kitchen. Does that make sense?
Yep,
Definitely.
totally. I just know that I deal with this on a pretty regular basis where images have CVEs where, the core functionality of the container is not impacted, but, given security, et cetera, you have to patch this. And so it's kind of a pain that I've been living in. So just looking to see if I could help out at all.
Yeah, Definitely. And that's like one of the things that I've been looking for is more people who've experienced some of this GitOps or DevOps level pain that's specific to containers, and base image CVEs has kind of been an emerging space the last while. People are starting to get it more. So any of you all who've lived it, I guess I would say at this point, reach out to Steven and say like, hey, I've lived this a bunch. I've got a fair amount of experience. I would love to help, because I know he's trying to figure out how to shard things and recognizes that he needs help and needs to enable that, because he doesn't want to own it all, obviously. Not sustainable. Hey, Marky, and any of the others on the Go bump, anything that you'd like to say about that?
We are currently in progress. Excuse me, it's myself and Veronica. I haven't been able to give as much focus on it last week as I would like to, so my hope is to start getting that moving this week. I have been watching Steven's work, mainly just to get sort of an idea of what needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, also last week, Marky was in charge of cutting the release, and we were getting educated on all that. By the way, thanks a lot to Carlos, because he has been a star helping us get through everything, figuring out everything that we need to know. So yeah, even if we don't have a lot of updates, visible updates, like we have been super busy in the backstage, and hopefully, as Marky said, after our meeting this Friday, we will be able to share more things.
Okay, well, anything else folks want to talk about today? Well, shall we end things early then?
Give everybody some time back to their lives.
Yeah. Okay, well, one last call. Anybody have anything they want to talk about today? Additional? Okay, well, let's go ahead and call it. We will have our regular SIG meeting next week. I'm curious to hear some of the updates on some of this stuff, and then obviously the release engineering will be next in 2 weeks. So I'll get this uploaded to YouTube. Thanks for dropping your names in the notes. For those who did, anybody who didn't do that, if you don't mind, drop your name in the attendees for the meeting. It's useful for the record, for seeing what all's up. And yeah, I'll get this up to YouTube a bit later. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great
you.
Tuesday.
Okay, have a good evening.